This video deals with differentiating inverse functions. We'll start with the definition of an inverse function. So the inverse function is just a function that reverses a process. If we start with x, these are the numbers in the domain. We can operate on these with f, a function, and out comes f of x. Doing this process backwards, beginning at f of x and going back to x, is inverse, which is written with a -1, inverse of f. The notation f -1 bracket x is the inverse function which depends on x. So if we look at these bubbles of domain and range, we can see that if you start at x, go to f of x by using the function f, going backwards is the inverse. So this means if we make a composite function of f operating on the inverse of x, we get x. Or the inverse function operating on f of x, we also get x. So this second one is really shown in the bubbles above. We start with the inner function, which is this f of x part. So we go from x, start at x, operate, get f of x, and then this part of the function is done second, so you operate the inverse on your f of x and go backwards, takes you back to x. So this is where x comes from. And we can find the derivative of the inverse of a function if we begin with f inverse of x. So the function operating on the inverse equals x. Start with this property and differentiate the left and the right. So the left is actually the chain rule, because we've got a function of a function. This is your inner function, and the f is your outer function, or big fish, little fish. First, we differentiate the outer function, or the big function, which is f. Differentiate f with respect to x, we can just write f dash, derivative of f. And then we substitute the inner function without changing it. Remember, to finish the chain rule, you multiply by the derivative of the inner function. We multiply by the derivative of the inverse, which I'll write as d dx of the inverse of f. Now the right hand side, the derivative of x is 1. Now we just need to rearrange to get this stuff, the derivative of the inverse, on the left hand side, as that's the idea of this. This is what we were trying to find from the beginning, the derivative of the inverse. So the derivative of the inverse function is equal to 1 divided by everything else, f dash inverse of x.